I never thought my heart would race for a guy who swore he was straight. The day we met, Ethan dropped it like a bomb. I'm not into guys, Caleb, let's keep it chill. His hazel eyes locked on mine, daring me to argue. I shrugged, said cool, but the air between us crackled. That night he sat too close on the dorm couch, his knee brushing mine. He didn't move, neither did I, and when he whispered, "You ever wonder what it's like?" I knew I was in trouble. I never thought my heart would race for a guy who swore he was straight. The day we met, Ethan dropped it like a bomb. I'm not into guys, Caleb, let's keep it chill. His hazel eyes locked on mine, daring me to argue. I shrugged, said cool, but the air between us crackled. That night he sat too close on the dorm couch, his knee brushing mine. He didn't move, neither did I, and when he whispered, "You ever wonder what it's like?" I knew I was in trouble. The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy and impossible to ignore. I could feel his eyes on me, searching for something I wasn't sure I was ready to give. My throat went dry, and all I could manage was a shrug that felt more like a confession than I intended. "Sometimes," I said, the word barely audible over the hum of our ancient mini-fridge. Ethan's laugh was soft, nervous. "Yeah, me too." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture I'd already started to memorize without realizing it. The way his fingers caught in the slight curl at his temples, the way he always looked down when he was thinking too hard about something. Ethan and I were random roommates at a small college in Oregon, thrown together in a cramped dorm room with twin beds and a shared mini-fridge. He was all charm, loud laugh, quick wit, the kind of guy who owned every room. I was quieter, still figuring out who I was after leaving a small town where being gay wasn't something you said out loud. Ethan didn't care. We clicked fast, late-night pizza runs, debates over music, and stupid bets over who could skip class and still pass. The campus was one of those places where everyone knew everyone, nestled between rolling hills covered in Douglas firs. Our dorm, Henderson Hall, was old brick with narrow hallways that always smelled like instant ramen and laundry detergent. Room 314 became our world, two twin beds separated by barely 3 feet, a desk we shared without ever discussing it, and posters that somehow blended his love of classic rock with my collection of indie film prints. Ethan had this way of filling spaces. When he laughed, it wasn't just a sound, it was like he'd turned up the brightness in the room. He'd sprawl across his bed after classes, one arm thrown over his eyes, telling me about his marketing professor who spoke in corporate buzzwords or the girl in his economics class who always sat in the exact center of the front row, taking notes in 3 different colored pens. "You listen," he said one evening in October when the trees outside our window had turned the color of fire. "Like, really listen, most people are just waiting for their turn to talk." He was lying on my bed that night, having flopped down without asking, something that had become normal between us. His feet were hanging off the end, socks mismatched as always. But there were moments, his hand lingering on my shoulder after a laugh, the way he'd sprawl across my bed, scrolling his phone, his arm brushing mine. "You're easy to talk to, Caleb," he'd say, voice low like it meant something. Then he'd ask weird questions. "Do guys ever mess around just to try it?" I'd dodge, heart pounding, because I was falling for him and he knew it. But every time we got close, he'd pull back, joking about some girl he met at a frat party, reminding me, I'm straight, dude. The questions started small, hypothetical. "What's it like, realizing you're gay?" he asked one night while we were both procrastinating on essays. He was building a house of cards on his desk, something he did when he was nervous. I mean, was there like a moment, or was it gradual? I told him about Marcus from high school, how I'd felt something shift when he smiled at me in chemistry class, how it had taken me months to name what that feeling was. Ethan listened, nodding, adding another careful card to his precarious tower. "That must have been scary," he said. "In a small town, I mean." "Yeah," I admitted, "it was." I didn't tell him about the nights I'd lain awake, terrified that someone would see through me. About my dad's casual comments about those people, or the way my mom would change the channel whenever anything remotely gay appeared on TV. Ethan's house of cards collapsed, and he stared at the scattered cards for a long moment. "I can't imagine," he said quietly. Then louder with forced brightness, "Anyway, speaking of chemistry, did you meet that blonde from my econ class, Sarah? She's been asking about you." The pivot always hurt, like whiplash. One moment we'd be somewhere real and honest, the next he'd be building walls again, reminding both of us of the line he wouldn't cross. Our routines became sacred. Coffee at 7 a.m. before his first class, even though I didn't have anything until noon. Study sessions in the library where we'd claim a corner table and spread out like we owned the place. Late-night walks around campus when the stress got too much, following paths lit by old-fashioned street lamps that made everything look like a movie set. It was during one of those walks that Ethan asked the question that changed everything. We were circling the duck pond, our breath visible in the November cold. "Caleb," he said, stopping suddenly by the water's edge, "have you ever kissed a guy?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "Yeah, have you?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, "No, but I think about it sometimes." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something raw and uncertain in his expression. Is that weird? No, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It's not weird. We stood there by the dark water, not moving, not speaking. A duck splashed somewhere in the distance, and the sound made us both jump. Ethan laughed, but it was shaky. We should get back, he said. It's cold. One night after a horror movie marathon, Ethan got spooked and ended up pressed against me, his breath warm on my neck. He didn't move away. My pulse raced, but I stayed still, terrified of breaking whatever this was. The next day he acted like it never happened, back to loud jokes and casual distance. Then he started dadding Mia, a sorority girl, with a laugh that echoed through our dorm. He'd bring her over, and I'd hear them through the wall, her giggles stabbing at me. The movie had been his choice, some Japanese horror film with subtitles and jump scares that came out of nowhere. We'd made popcorn and turned off all the lights, settling onto his bed because it was closer to his laptop. When the ghost first appeared, Ethan had grabbed my arm without thinking, his fingers digging into my sleeve. Sorry, he'd muttered, but he didn't let go. By the third jump scare, he was practically in my lap, his face buried against my shoulder. I could smell his shampoo, something clean and woodsy that I'd grown to associate with home. When the credits rolled, we didn't move. His breathing had evened out, and I wondered if he'd fallen asleep. Caleb, his voice was muffled against my shirt. Yo, thanks for not making fun of me for being a wimp. I turned my head slightly, and suddenly his face was inches from mine. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated in the blue glow of his laptop screen. For a moment, just a moment, I thought he might kiss me. His gaze flicked down to my mouth, then back up. Then his phone buzzed with a text, and the spell was broken. He rolled away, checking the message with a grin. Sarah wants to know if I want to hang out tomorrow. He glanced at me, and something in his expression looked almost apologetic. Cool, right? But it wasn't Sarah he ended up with. It was Mia Rodriguez, a junior in Kappa Delta with perfect teeth and a laugh that could be heard 3 floors up. She was everything I wasn't: outgoing, confident, completely comfortable in her own skin. When Ethan first brought her around, she shook my hand and said, "So you're the famous roommate. Ethan talks about you all the time." I wanted to hate her, but she made it impossible. She was genuinely kind, the type of person who remembered your coffee order and asked about your midterms. She'd bring extra cookies from her sorority's bake sales and leave them on our desk with little notes, "For the hardworking boys in 314. Watching them together was agony. Ethan would light up when she walked in, all his nervous energy channeling into charm and attention. He'd loop his arm around her waist, kiss her temple, whisper things that made her giggle and blush. And I'd sit there, pretending to study, pretending it didn't feel like someone was pulling my heart through a paper shredder. The worst part was that he'd still seek me out afterward. After she left, he'd flop onto my bed with a satisfied grin and ask, "So, what did you think? She's amazing, right?" And I'd nod and say yes, because what else could I do? I tried to move on, but the campus wasn't kind. Whispers followed me, guys in the hall calling me that gay kid, teammates from high school texting to ask why I was acting weird. My mom called, her voice sharp, "Don't do anything to embarrass us, Caleb." Ethan's distance hurt worse. He'd avoid my eyes, leave early, come back late smelling of Mia's perfume. One night I caught him staring at me, his face soft, unguarded. "What?" I snapped. He looked away. "Nothing," but it wasn't nothing. I was breaking. The breaking point came gradually, then all at once. First, it was comments from guys on our floor. Jake Morrison, who lived 2 doors down, started making jokes about fairy roommates loud enough for me to hear. When I passed him in the hallway, he'd make exaggerated lisping sounds or ask if I needed help picking out an outfit. Then it was the looks, other students starring a beat too long, conversations that stopped when I walked by. Someone had figured out I was gay, and word was spreading through the small campus like wildfire. I suspected it was Tyler Chen from my literature class, who'd seen me at the one LGBT+ meeting I'd worked up the courage to attend. The phone call from my mom was the final straw. Her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Mrs. Henderson saw something online," she said. "Some photo from your school. Caleb, please tell me that you're not doing anything foolish." "Mom, your father doesn't know I'm calling, but if there are rumors, if people are talking, you have to be careful. We have a reputation in this town." I hung up feeling hollowed out, scraped raw. When Ethan came back from his date that night, reeking of Mia's vanilla perfume and wearing her lipstick on his collar, I couldn't even look at him. "Good night," I asked, not lifting my eyes from my textbook. "Yeah, great." He paused by his bed, and I could feel him watching me. "You okay? You seem." "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. I was drowning, and the person I wanted most to save me was too busy pretending I didn't exist to throw me a rope. The night everything changed, I was alone in the room, trying to write an essay about existentialism that felt too real for comfort. Ethan had gone to some frat party with Mia, promising to be back not too late. It was past midnight when I heard his key in the lock. He stumbled in clearly drunk, his hair messed up and his shirt wrinkled. But he was alone, and there was something broken in his expression that made my chest tighten. "Where's Mia?" I asked. He collapsed onto his bed without answering, throwing one arm over his eyes. "Caleb. Yo. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" I closed my laptop and turned to face him. "What happened?" "She wanted to." He sat up, running both hands through his hair. "We were at this party and everyone was drinking and she pulled me upstairs to this bedroom." He looked at me and his eyes were glassy with more than just alcohol. I couldn't do it. I couldn't. My heart started racing, but I forced my voice to stay level. "That's okay. Maybe you just had too much to drink." "No," he cut me off, shaking his head. "It wasn't the alcohol, it was—" He trailed off, staring at his hands. "Shit, Caleb, I think I'm losing my mind." I wanted to go to him, to sit beside him and tell him it was okay, that whatever he was feeling was valid and real. But I stayed on my bed, paralyzed by hope and terror in equal measure. "I should probably get some sleep," he said finally, voice hollow. "Big game tomorrow." But neither of us slept. I lay there listening to him toss and turn, both of us pretending the other wasn't awake. And in the morning, Mia was back, and Ethan was all smiles again, like the conversation had never happened. It all exploded one rainy night. Ethan came back from a party, alone, soaked, eyes red. I was done pretending. "Why do you keep doing this?" I yelled. "You act like you feel something, then run to her like I'm nothing." He froze, jaw tight. "You don't get it, Caleb. This isn't easy for me." "What isn't feeling something real?" He stepped closer, voice shaking. "I'm not supposed to want you. My dad would kill me. My friends would. What about what you want?" I cut him off. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the campus into a watercolor painting of blurred lights and running colors. I was lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the drops hit our window, when Ethan burst through the door like he was escaping from something. He was completely soaked, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, water dripping from his jacket onto our worn carpet. His eyes were bloodshot, whether from crying or drinking or both, I couldn't tell, but there was something wild in his expression, something desperate that made my stomach clench. "Where's Mia?" I asked, sitting up. "Gone." He shrugged off his jacket, letting it fall to the floor with a wet thud. Party was shit anyway. But I could tell there was more to it. The way he was avoiding my eyes, the tension in his shoulders, something had happened. I'd spent months learning to read his moods, cataloging every expression and gesture like my survival depended on it. "Ethan, don't." He held up a hand, still not looking at me. "Just don't, okay?" That's when something inside me snapped. All the weeks of watching him run away from whatever this was between us, all the nights of lying awake listening to him with Mia, all the careful pretending and polite distance, it crashed over me like a dam bursting. "Why do you keep doing this?" The words came out louder than I intended, filling our small room with raw anger. "You act like you feel something, then run to her like I'm nothing." He froze, his back still to me, and I saw his shoulders go rigid. Slowly, he turned around and his jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. "You don't get it, Caleb." "Then explain it to me." I was on my feet now, months of frustration pouring out of me. "Because I'm going crazy here, trying to figure out what any of this means. One minute you're asking me about kissing guys, the next you're pretending I don't exist. One minute you're pressed against me during movies, the next you're showing up covered in her perfume." His face had gone pale, except for 2 spots of color high on his cheeks. "It's not that simple." "What isn't feeling something real?" I stepped closer and I could smell the rain on his skin, see the way his hands were shaking slightly. "Because that's what this is, isn't it? This thing between us. It's real and it scares the shit out of you." "I'm not supposed to want you." The words exploded out of him, raw and broken. "My dad would kill me. My friends would. Christ, Caleb, my whole life would fall apart. You don't understand what it's like having people expect you to be someone you're not." He was close enough now that I could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, could count the freckles scattered across his nose. His chest was rising and falling rapidly, like he'd been running. "What about what you want?" I cut him off, my voice softer now but no less intense. "Not your dad, not your friends, not Mia. What do you want?" He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed my face and kissed me, hard, desperate, like he'd been holding it back forever. My knees buckled. His lips were cold from the rain but warmed quickly under mine, and he tasted like beer and something essentially him that I'd been craving without knowing it. The kiss was everything I'd imagined and nothing like I'd expected. Desperate, yes, but also tender in a way that made my chest ache. His hands were tangled in my hair, and I could feel him trembling, could taste the salt of tears, his or mine, I wasn't sure. When he pulled away, his eyes were wide, scared. "I can't do this," he whispered, stepping back. "Not yet." I wanted to scream, but I just stood there, heart in pieces, as he walked out into the rain. The next day, Mia was back, and Ethan wouldn't look at me. I felt betrayed, used, like I'd been a test he failed. The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone with the taste of him on my lips and the echo of his words ringing in my ears. I sank down onto my bed, legs finally giving out, and pressed my fingers to my mouth like I could hold onto the kiss that way. The next morning was torture. I woke up with hope blooming in my chest, only to find Mia perched on Ethan's bed, chattering about some party she'd been to after leaving him at the first one. She was wearing his sweatshirt, the one I'd borrowed countless times, and seeing it on her felt like a betrayal all over again. Ethan barely glanced at me when I got up for coffee. "Morning," he said, but his voice was carefully neutral, like he was talking to a stranger, like he hadn't kissed me senseless 12 hours earlier. "Morning," I replied, grabbing my mug and heading for the door. I couldn't stay there, couldn't watch him pretend it never happened while she sat there in his clothes, blissfully unaware that her boyfriend had been kissing his roommate in the rain. I spent the next week avoiding our room as much as possible. I studied in the library until it closed, ate meals at odd hours when I knew they wouldn't be in the dining hall, and came back late enough that Ethan would already be asleep, or at least pretending to be. But I could feel his eyes on me sometimes, could sense him starting to say something before thinking better of it. The tension in the room was suffocating, like we were both holding our breath, waiting for something to break. Weeks passed in silence. I stopped trying to reach him, started eating alone, avoiding our room. But one night Ethan waited for me, sitting on my bed, hands clasped tight. "I'm sorry," he said, voice raw. "I was scared. I've never felt like this before, not with Mia, not with anyone." He looked up, eyes glassy. "It's you, Caleb. It's always been you. I didn't trust it, not after everything." "Why now?" I asked. "Because pretending hurts worse than the truth." The conversation that changed everything happened 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday night in December when the first snow was starting to fall. I'd been at the library until closing, working on a paper about identity in modern literature that felt uncomfortably personal. When I got back to the room, I expected to find it empty. Ethan usually spent Tuesday nights at Mia's sorority. But he was there, sitting on my bed with his back against the wall, knees drawn up to his chest. He looked smaller somehow, younger, like the confident mask he usually wore had finally slipped completely. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey," I set down my backpack, unsure of what to do with myself. It was the first word we'd exchanged in days that wasn't about practical roommate stuff, whose turn it was to take out the trash, whether he'd seen my psychology textbook. "Can we talk?" My heart started racing, but I tried to keep my expression neutral. "About what?" "You know what." I did know, but I wasn't going to make it easy for him, not after weeks of being ignored. "Actually, I don't. We haven't exactly been communicating lately." He flinched, and I felt a stab of guilt. But then I remembered the kiss, remembered how he'd walked away, remembered the past 3 weeks of watching him pretend I didn't exist while he played happy couple with Mia. "I broke up with Mia," he said suddenly. I sat down on his bed, facing him, trying to process this information. "When?" "Yesterday." He ran a hand through his hair, that nervous gesture I knew so well. She knew something was wrong, had known for a while, I think. She said I seemed distracted, like I was thinking about someone else. "Were you?" He looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time in weeks. "You know I was." The admission hung between us, fragile as spun glass. I wanted to reach for it, to hold it close, but I was terrified of shattering it with the wrong word or movement. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I was scared. I've never felt like this before, not with Mia, not with anyone." His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "It's you, Caleb. It's always been you." The words I'd been desperate to hear for months, but now that he was saying them, I couldn't quite believe it. "Why now?" I asked. "Why not 3 weeks ago, after?" "Because I'm an idiot," he said with a shaky laugh. "Because I thought I could go back to pretending, thought I could force myself to feel for her what I feel for you. But I can't. Every time she kissed me, I thought about that night. Every time she touched me, I wished it was your hands instead." He reached for my hand then, his fingers cold and slightly trembling. "I know I have no right to ask you to forgive me. I know I hurt you. But pretending hurts worse than the truth, and the truth is that I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me, and I don't know what to do about it." I stared down at our joined hands, his pale fingers intertwined with mine. "I don't know if I can do this," I said quietly. The back and forth, the uncertainty. I can't be your experiment, Ethan. I can't be the thing you try out when you're curious and then abandon when it gets too real. That's not what you are. His grip tightened on my hand. You're not an experiment. You're, God, Caleb, you're everything. You're the first person who's ever really seen me, really listened to me. You make me want to be braver than I am. Then be brave, I said, looking up at him. Not for me, not for anyone else, for you. He was quiet for a long time, studying our joined hands. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I told my parents I'm gay. I blinked, sure I'd misheard. You what? Yesterday, after I broke up with Mia, I called them. He let out a shaky breath. It went about as well as you'd expect. Dad hung up on me. Mom cried. She kept asking where she went wrong, what she could have done differently. Ethan, I didn't know what to say. I thought about my own parents, about the careful distance we maintained, about the parts of myself I kept hidden from them. I know it's not enough, he continued. I know I have a lot more work to do, a lot more growing up, but I couldn't keep lying, not to them, not to myself, and especially not to you. He reached up with his free hand and touched my cheek, thumb brushing away a tear I didn't realize had fallen. I love you, Caleb. I'm scared out of my mind, and I don't know what I'm doing, but I love you. This time, when he leaned in to kiss me, it was different, soft, tentative, like a question instead of a declaration. I kissed him back, tasting salt and possibility and the promise of something real. He reached for my hand, and this time I let him. We didn't kiss again, not yet. We just sat there, fingers laced, breathing together. He told me about his dad's expectations, his fear of losing friends, the weight of being someone he wasn't. I told him about my own shame, my mom's warnings, the loneliness of hiding. We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other. Over the next few hours, we talked about everything we should have talked about months ago. About his childhood in suburban Portland, where being different wasn't just discouraged, but actively punished. About his dad, a former Marine who believed emotions were weakness and deviation was failure. About the pressure to be perfect, to be the son who made his parents proud. I told him about my small town, about the church where my family went every Sunday, and the pastor who preached about the sin of homosexuality. About the nights I'd lain awake praying to be different, to be normal, to be anything other than what I was. When did you know? He asked, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of my hand. About being gay or about you? Both. I thought about it, being gay. I think I always knew on some level, but I didn't have words for it until high school. About you, I looked at him, memorizing the way the lamplight caught in his eyes. The first night when you asked if I'd ever wondered what it was like, the way you looked at me when you said it, I knew then that you were asking about more than just curiosity. He smiled, sad and soft. I've been asking about you without realizing it for months. All those hypothetical questions, all that wondering about what it would be like. I was really wondering what it would be like with you. The snow was falling harder outside our window, blanketing the campus in white silence. We talked until the sky started to lighten, until we were both exhausted but neither willing to break the spell by going to sleep. What happens now? I asked as dawn painted the sky pink and gold. I don't know, he admitted. I'm still figuring this out, but I want to figure it out with you if you'll let me. Months later, we were still us, quietly navigating stolen glances and late-night talks. Ethan wasn't ready to tell the world, and I didn't push. But when he held my hand under the table at a campus coffee shop, I knew he was trying, and that was enough. Some people stared, some whispered, but we kept going. Because love, real love, doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stay. The transition wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments when Ethan would panic and pull away, nights when the weight of other people's expectations felt too heavy to bear. His father stopped talking to him entirely after that phone call, and his mother called less frequently, their conversations stilted and careful. But there were also moments of unexpected grace. His younger sister, Emma, called him a week after he came out, crying and telling him she loved him no matter what. His friend Marcus from high school, who'd always been the most vocally homophobic of the group, sent a long text apologizing for the things he'd said and asking if they could still be friends. On campus, the reactions were mixed but mostly positive. Our floor mates had figured it out weeks before we officially came out as a couple, and most of them just shrugged and said it was about time. Jake Morrison, the one who'd made the nasty comments, got a stern talking to from our raw and avoided me entirely after that, which was fine by me. The first time Ethan introduced me as his boyfriend instead of his roommate, we were at a coffee shop off campus, and he said it so quietly I almost didn't hear him. But the pride in his voice was unmistakable, and the way he squeezed my hand under the table made my chest warm with something deeper than love, with hope. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it felt like a rebirth. Ethan and I would walk across campus together, not hiding but not flaunting either, just existing as ourselves. He'd gotten a job at the campus bookstore, and I'd see him sometimes between classes, helping students find textbooks or restocking shelves, looking more relaxed and genuine than I'd ever seen him before. "You seem different," I told him one evening as we lay on his bed, supposedly studying but mostly just enjoying each other's company. "Different how?" "Happier, like you're not carrying something heavy all the time." He turned to look at me, smiling in that soft way that was just for me. "I'm not hiding anymore. It's exhausting, pretending to be someone you're not." "I know," I said, thinking about all the years I'd spent carefully monitoring my words, my gestures, my reactions. "It's like you can finally breathe." "Exactly." He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, a gesture so tender it made my heart skip. "I can breathe with you." We graduated that spring, walking across the stage 2 names apart, our families sitting in different sections of the auditorium. Ethan's mother had come without his father, and she'd hugged me afterward with tears in her eyes. "Take care of each other," she whispered, and I promised we would. My parents were there too, still struggling to understand but trying in their own way. My mom had even asked if Ethan would be joining us for dinner, a small step that felt monumental. That summer we moved to Portland together, finding a tiny apartment in the Alberta district with hardwood floors and windows that let in more light than our old dorm room ever had. Ethan got a job at an advertising agency, and I started working at an independent bookstore while applying to graduate programs. Our first apartment was a far cry from luxury, a studio with a kitchenette and a bathroom the size of a closet, but it was ours. We painted the walls a warm yellow and hung string lights around the windows. Ethan set up his record player in the corner, and I claimed a bookshelf by the bed for my ever-growing collection of novels. On quiet evenings, we'd cook dinner together in our tiny kitchen, music playing softly while we moved around each other in the practiced dance of people who'd learned to share space. Ethan would tell me about his day, about the clients who wanted to sell everything from organic dog treats to high-end bicycles, and I'd tell him about the customers who came into the bookstore looking for recommendations or simply wanting someone to talk to about their favorite authors. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked one night as we were cleaning up after dinner. "The simplicity of being in the closet, not having to explain yourself to anyone." I considered the question seriously. Sometimes, I admitted, it was easier in some ways, not having to deal with other people's reactions or judgments, but it wasn't really living, it was just surviving. He nodded, drying a plate with more attention than it required. I used to think that survival was enough, that as long as I could function, could meet everyone's expectations, that was success. And no. Now I know the difference between surviving and living. He set down the plate and turned to face me, his expression serious. "I was surviving with Mia, I'm living with you." The conversation reminded me of something I'd been thinking about for weeks. "I want to visit your parents," I said suddenly. Ethan went very still. "What?" "Your mom, anyway. I know she's been trying, and I think maybe if she met me properly, not just at graduation, she might understand better." He was quiet for a long time, staring out our kitchen window at the street below. Finally, he spoke. "She'd like that. She's been asking about you, actually, wondering if you're taking care of yourself, if you're happy." "Are you happy?" I asked, suddenly needing to hear his answer. He smiled then, the full bright smile that had first caught my attention in our cramped dorm room. "Yeah, Caleb, I'm happy." We visited his mother that fall, driving down to Portland's suburbs on a crisp October day when the leaves were turning gold and red. Mrs. Davidson had made dinner, pot roast with vegetables, apple pie for dessert, and she fussed over us like we